Hello muckers, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're all doing really well. Thank you so much for clicking on my YouTube video. If you're aware, I'm currently traveling. It is the holiday season. If you're celebrating, happy holidays to all of you, and I hope that this end of the year is everything and more for you, and that 2024 is a good ass year. Also, I love the fact that I can literally be traveling, not in my apartment, anything of the sort, and I will still find a way to bring this camp ass pink mic with me. I literally packed it in my suitcase, and it comes with so much equipment that is so heavy, and it like pushed my suitcase over the limit, but I don't care. I'm bringing this pink mic everywhere I go. All right, everyone. Hello. I hope you're all doing well. So, yesterday we covered Ruby Franke, in which she pled guilty in the current trial that is upcoming, and a lot of people were very intrigued with the video and wanted me to do a follow-up on it, and this is actually going to be featuring a channel that we have... Sorry, this hair is sticking out in it. Okay, so... this is actually a channel that we have dived into before. It is the Law and Crime Network on YouTube, and they've done a pretty great job at covering this Ruby Franke situation, and I've really enjoyed their coverage of it, and a lot of people were asking me to go and react to it, which is exactly what we're going to do today. It is 8 disturbing details in the Ruby Franke guilty plea agreement. Now, Jody Hildebrandt... Hold on, let me turn that over. Sorry, my lighting was just faced the wrong way. I said in my video that I really just want to know what's going to happen to Jody Hildebrandt as well, because as much as I detest Ruby Franke and what she did to the kids, Jody Hildebrandt not only has done this to Ruby Franke's kids, but has done it to like her own family members and has done it to so many other families and kids. And I hope that Ruby Franke, we're told she's going to get between 4 and 60 years. I hope she gets all 60 years. And I've heard that might not happen because she took the guilty plea, which means that because the kids don't have to go through the trauma of being on the stand, it means that she can get less years, which is just so fucked up. That, you know, it's like evading responsibility and accountability and repercussions. But with Jody Hildebrandt, it's going to be really interesting. I think her trial where she is, you know, going to make a decision is in a couple days. So I will give you an update. It could literally be on Christmas morning, and I will leave downstairs and come back up here and film for you. Because I need to know what happens to Jody Hildebrandt. And I really hope that this is the nail in the coffin, that Jody Hildebrandt is locked away for quite possibly the rest of her life. I think for the trauma that she has inflicted on many different kinds of kids, I think that she is just a dangerous woman who is very destructive to families, and I don't know what her motives are, but she's very evil. So, we're going to get to this video. Again, this is the Law and Crime Network. I will pin their video down below. Go and support them. Go subscribe to them. Give them all the love. But let's go. Let's react to it, and let's do it. Okay, so here we go. 8 disturbing details in Ruby Franke's guilty plea agreement. Okay.
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
Ruby Franke.
With my dearest sorrow and regret to my children, guilty. You still did it. You still did it. And I know that there was a lot of people in my video yesterday because I made a point where I was annoyed that there are people's jobs within the system that defend guilty people. And I understand why that is. Like, people were like, well, you know, for a fair democracy, for a fair argument, like, that needs to happen. But it just bothers me that someone is literally getting paid to defend someone who abused their kids to the degree that Ruby Franke did. I understand why these people do this, but I can still say how flawed that feels to me. And I know a lot of people agreed with me. I know a lot of people disagreed with me. But it just bothers me that, like, there's people fighting against the truth. You know what I mean? This isn't a case of tit for tat. This is, you did abuse your kids. You're agreeing to it now.
He has pled guilty in court to the abuse of her own children. Her plea agreement goes into detail about what she did to her kids, and it is horrifying. Also, what does this mean for a potential sentence? We break it all down for you now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
Hey, Jesse! Hey!
Franke has officially pled guilty. This is a major development in a case that we have been following since August. This case out of Utah. Ruby Franke has pled guilty. Now, Ruby Franke is the former YouTuber who, alongside her husband, Kevin, created a now defunct channel on the platform called 8 Passengers. This was a very popular channel.
And I saw a lot of people saying as well that if Ruby Franke gets, like, the maximum sentence, that there's no way that Kevin Franke can't, like, be federally investigated. And I completely agree with that. I think Kevin Franke should be being investigated as we speak right now, instead of him being in a courtroom fighting for the fucking, fighting for the, what's the word? To have the kids in his control. Like, that pisses me off. Like, he is guilty in this as well, whether people want to fucking admit that or not.
It documented the lives of the couple along with their 6 children. It had over 2 million subscribers, but it didn't come without controversy. No, viewers took major issues with how Ruby was parenting, or maybe I should say disciplining her kids.
So in our house, when we take something away, it's because they have shown that they are not responsible enough to manage it. And so we don't just turn around and give it back as soon as they start acting good.
It has to be consistent.
It has to be consistent over a minimum of 6 months.
Minimum of 6 months. Minimum of 6 months. People like this should never be parents. Should never be in control of another person.
Her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry, and
Mom hopes 6-year-old goes hungry after she forgot to make her own lunch. So the 6-year-old forgot to make her own lunch, so Ruby Franke decided to starve her.
not having a lunch. And it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry.
Now, at one point, Ruby ended up partnering up with a woman named Jody Hildebrandt, who was offering these life coaching services through an organization known as Connections. In fact, Ruby was listed as a certified mental fitness trainer on the Connection.
Certified mental fitness. I'm sorry? I'm sorry?
His website. But in August, she and Hildebrandt were each arrested and each charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse of Frankie's 2 young children who were staying at Hildebrandt's place.
And by the way, this is only the 6 counts or whatever of Ruby Frankie's kids. How many other kids has Jody Hildebrandt done this to? Countless. We literally had Jody Hildebrandt's niece coming forward saying that Jody did it to them as well.
Her 12-year-old son managed to escape Hildebrandt's home, ran to a neighbor who called 911.
911, the address of your emergency?
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. We know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty.
Now, the boy was reportedly emaciated with wounds, and there was evidence that he'd been tied up. His then 9-year-old sister, we believe that she's 10 now, her Ruby's daughter, was reportedly found in the house in similar condition. She was taken to the hospital to be treated for malnourishment. To be treated for malnourishment. Please don't allow these words to just be read to us and we just go, okay, you know, malnourished, emaciated. For someone to categorize something like that, it needs to be extreme as well, which is just like, these people deserve the maximum sentence. They were each arrested. They were charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. Our understanding that each count could be a max of 15 years in prison. And by the way, Kevin ended up filing for divorce from Ruby. And according to his lawyer, he had been living separately from her for over a year before her arrest. Okay, so then...
But didn't he say that he was aware of all this going on because he didn't trust Jody and Jody treated him like shit?
That Ruby was going to enter a plea on Monday, December 18th. There were apparently negotiations happening behind the scenes with the prosecutor's office. There was supposed to be a waiver hearing on December 18th. We had speculated, well, what could this be? A waiver hearing, of course, is where a defendant in Utah can waive a preliminary hearing, a hearing where the prosecutor will present all their evidence to a judge to determine if there is enough evidence to go forward. A number of reasons why you'd want a waiver hearing.
How much more evidence do you want?
You end up entering into a plea and you no longer need a trial. And what was particularly interesting in the statement that was released by her law firm in anticipation of this plea deal was who she was blaming. I'm going to highlight one interesting part. She says, quote, Ruby Franke is a devoted mother and is also a woman committed to constant improvement. Initially, Miss Franke believed that Jody Hildebrandt had the insight to offer up...
Oh, okay, so she went from, I don't know if you remember this, but it was only like a month or so ago. Remember when she was in court throwing her children under the bus and saying that it was her children that were the ones that were abusing people, even though apparently they're not allowed to leave their bedrooms and stuff? Remember they were abusing the whole neighborhood? But now, that didn't work. So she's now saying that it was Jody Hildebrandt, which is quite possibly true, but, you know... Call a spade a spade. You were also abusing the kids with her.
Continual improvement. Miss Hildebrandt took advantage of this quest. and twisted it into something heinous. Over an extended
Which
period,
Ruby
Miss Hildebrandt
engaged with.
systematically isolated Ruby Franke from her extended family, older children, and her husband, Kevin Franke. This prolonged isolation resulted in Miss Franke being subjected to a distorted sense of morality, shaped by Miss Hildebrandt's influence. So really putting the blame, in a way, on Jody. Very, very interesting. Now, with all that in mind, let's get into what happened. Ruby Franke officially pled guilty in the 5th District Court in Washington County, Utah, in front of Judge John J. Walton. She pled guilty to 4 of the 6 charges, 4 counts of aggravated child abuse, each one a second-degree felony.
Which is interesting that she didn't say it to all of them.
1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
Guilty.
To count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
Guilty.
And to count 6, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
Now, 2 of the charges were dropped. Counts 2 and 4 in the original information. Remember, I said she was originally charged with 6 counts. Well, 2 were dropped. And these counts were about abuse of both of the kids, where the physical injuries resulted in starvation or failure to thrive or malnutrition that jeopardized the child's life. Now, I wonder if, since this was a plea deal, the prosecution just agreed to drop something, and maybe these 2 charges were duplicative of the other counts. Doesn't seem to me that they were tough to prove, as you will see in a minute. But either way, what Franke pled guilty to is incredibly serious, as you're about to hear. We all know how much these cases really...
But furthermore, that's something that's so just weird to fathom. Like, oh, you have 6 counts of child abuse. If you agree to even a couple of them, we'll drop a couple of them. If she's being charged with 6 counts, let's look into all fucking 6 counts. We don't need to just drop things because, oh, she's throwing a fucking bone to us and agreeing with some of them. You know, these things are so easy to prove with public knowledge that I can't even imagine how easy they're to prove with private knowledge. Like, let's not half-ass this, right? Like, these are dangerous people who abuse children. And if you're going to do the trial right. I understand when you go into a guilty plea, like, it evades a lot of the responsibility and it makes the case a lot easier and you're seen more favorably. I'm aware of that. But let's remember, circle back to the fact that this is all stemming from her abusing her children. So I don't care about what makes her look good or what doesn't, or in the eyes of the law. Fuck that.
really emphasize how scary the world can be and how unsafe it can be. That's why I wanted to take a minute to talk about our sponsor of this video, Morgan & Morgan. They have just been an incredible partner.
I was not expecting that. I was not expecting that.
Is admitting to these crimes. Okay, so it starts. From approximately May 22nd, 2023 until August 30th, 2023. So now we have a date range. 3 months of this abuse. In Washington County, Utah, the defendant, Ruby Franke, intentionally or knowingly inflicted and allowed another adult to
What do you mean
inflict
intentionally
serious physical
or not?
injuries upon her children that were ages 9 EF and 11 to 12 RF, as more fully described below. So she didn't just do it herself, but she seemingly allowed Jody to do it too. Now, again, it's important when you look at the ages here, seemingly 9 years old for the daughter, 11 to 12 for the son. Seems to me like this might have happened before and through his own birthday. Let's get into it. Count one is the longest.
Here's the thing as well, like, again, in court, they're saying, you know, between these 3 months, Jody is admitting that she was doing this to her children. But how long was Jody in control of the family? How long was Jody in communications with the children? Do I believe that it was only 3 months? I think that's bullshit, and I think that that's a cop-out of agreeing to enough, but not agreeing to the truth. I feel this is a perfect example of, again, in the eyes of the law, throwing a fucking bone and being like, I'm giving you something. Okay, so it was only 3 months now, but this was a huge chunk of their life ever since Kevin left, right? So I don't know why we're allowing it to be like dulled down just because she's agreeing that she did it between these time periods. Fuck off.
And I warn you right now, this is incredibly difficult to hear. And count 1 is aggravated child abuse of RF, her 11, 12-year-old son. And it's about physical injury that includes physical torture. This is what it says. Count 1. The defendant's actions involve the physical torture of RF. Initially, RF was forced to do physical tasks for hours and days at a time. These included wall sits, carrying boxes full of books up and down stairs, and working outside. Eventually, RF was forced to do outside labor without shoes and in the summer heat. He was forced to stand in the direct sunlight for several days. He was forced to remain outside at all hours of the day and night for extended periods of time. These actions resulted in repeated and serious sunburns with blistered and sloughing skin. RF was denied adequate water for several of the days he was required to remain in the summer heat, and he was punished when he secretly consumed water. He was denied sufficient food, and when given food, he was given very plain meals, example, rice and chicken, while others in the house ate regular and more flavorful meals. He was isolated from other people and denied all forms of entertainment, including books, notebooks, and electronics. In addition,
And again, this is what we're hearing, that Jody Hildebrandt is saying that it was like her children were going around the neighborhood. I think her words were like saying other kids. Meanwhile, they're not allowed to leave the house, only to do chores that are extremely nauseating and unnecessary and like just physically torturous for no other reason than power. And it just surprises me that so many people would have witnessed this, you know what I mean, in a neighborhood. We're talking about in the hot heat that you would get out there. These kids are, you know, out there all day, all night, getting sunburned, blistered, doing all this unnecessary shit during the summer heat, not getting water. Like, there are people that are witnessing this happen, and I'm aware that they were calling CPS and calling the police, and I think it's just an incredibly devastating story of so many people in the industry overlooking the safety of children, and it's bullshit. It's bullshit that it took so long. It's bullshit that even those 3 months, those kids had to go through it. But I believe that it was longer than 3 months, as I'm sure most people do. But it's excruciating to even think that the kids had to deal with that for say, 3 months. We're aware that it was more than likely way longer than that, but it's just like, these kids were failed a lot, very much so. And if there's going to be one piece of, you can't take back what happened, but if there's going to be one piece of justice, show the kids that there is repercussions, that these people aren't going to get away with it. And that includes fucking Jody, and that includes Kevin. Investigate them all.
after RF attempted to run away in July, his hands and feet were
We're talking about children literally running away, by the way.
Included being tied to the defendant and to weights. Many times, the binding included using 2 sets of handcuffs, one on RF's wrists and one on his ankles. Again, very consistent with what we've heard so far about his injuries. At times, with RF lying on his stomach, ropes were used to tie the 2 sets of handcuffs together so that his arms and lower legs were lifted off the ground. The bindings resulted in injuries to RF's wrists and ankles, where the handcuffs cut through the skin and damaged the muscle tissue. These injuries...
We're talking about 11-year-olds and like 10-year-olds.
Covered with duct tape. That's when we heard about the cayenne pepper being used. Then the bindings were placed on top of the duct tape. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, it goes on to say, again, all part of count 1, physical torture.
1.
Specific instances of abuse committed by the defendant include 1, kicking RF while wearing boots, 2, holding his head underwater, and 3, cutting off oxygen by placing her hands over his mouth and nose. I tell you right now,
Why?
I'm not going to lie to you, that is actually worse than what I thought we were dealing with. I didn't know any of that. I don't think any of us really knew any of that. You know, it seems to me one of the reasons...
So when you see this woman here and she goes, For the sake of my family, guilty. For the sake of my family. What we just read is what she was doing on a daily basis to her own fucking children. So when she stands up there and plays this fucking nice, orchestrated character that her and her fucking lawyers have worked on, remember that that's what she did to her kids. Remember that that's what she did to her kids.
Aggravation charges were dropped is because it was duplicative of this conduct. You might not have needed that after everything we just heard. And it does make me wonder if that account, everything that we just heard, was not only determined from the physical evidence, the physical examinations of the kids, what the kids ended up saying to law enforcement and medical professionals, but maybe Ruby Franke herself, which she admitted to doing. I mean, again, this is her admitting to what she did personally and what she allowed to happen. We're going to talk about punishment a little later, but just keep all that in mind, that description. And keep in mind, too, when we talk about her putting the blame on Jody, there's the second count, which actually was count 3 in the original information document, but this is the second count that she's pleading guilty to. And this count is about aggravated child abuse on RF, her son, but it's about physical injury causing emotional harm. Count 2. The actions described above caused severe emotional harm to RF due to the fact that it began in May and escalated through the summer months. Fairly understandable. Additionally, the defendant and another adult, presumably Jody, regularly sought to indoctrinate RF and convince him that he was evil and possessed, and that he needed to willingly be obedient to avoid punishments, and that the punishments were necessary to repent. He was also told that everything that was being done to him were acts of love.
Which, again, the ramifications emotionally that can have on a child, because we're talking about children here, who then will associate, oh, this being done to me, but that was an act of love. What these children are going to have to deal with in the long term, because they are associating acts of love with being punished, or acts of love with, you know, that alone send these parents off for life. You give them 4 years in prison and they come out and they do the same thing again. And Jody having all the responsibility thrown on her by Ruby is such a strategic move, and quite frankly, it is a smart one. But I don't care about smart moves or whatever when we're dealing with what these kids are going to have to live with. I don't care about any of that. It's a smart move to throw all of the blame onto Jody, and Jody did this, and try, you know, get yourself out of it like that. But fuck you at the end of the day, because you still did this to your children.
Yeah. That level of manipulation, that again is so consistent with what we've heard about from alleged victims of Jody Hildebrandt, including her niece, Jessie, who we interviewed in October.
So she strips you of identity, she strips you of credibility, and she isolates. And so she's saying everything that you say is a lie. Everything that you say is...
Oh my god, we haven't watched this one. We watched the other one. If you want to watch this one, I will watch it.
Destroying everyone's life. And she would tell me all the time, if you just confess, I will stop. You confess, I will stop, which is torture.
Again,
confess to what? Fuck me.
What this description was about what these kids had to endure. And I said kids because now let's move on to the third count. We talked about the son. Now let's talk about the daughter. So this was the third count that Ruby is pleading guilty to, but this was actually count 5 in the original information. And this is about the abuse of EF, Ruby's then 9-year-old daughter. And this is injury resulting in emotional harm. Count 3. The defendant's actions also caused severe emotional harm to EF. Other than binding and the specific instances of abuse RF was subjected to, EF was subjected to the same treatment as her brother. She was isolated and forced to do the physical...
We're talking about a 9-year-old child.
...outside and denied food and water. She was also repeatedly told she was evil and possessed. The punishment was necessary for her to be obedient and to repent. And these things were being done to her in order to help her. EF was convinced that she was evil.
At 9 years old.
...through these things in order to repent. Can we just understand for a minute what these kids psychologically now have to go through to not accept what happened to them? I mean, that is a clear example of what we've talked about with other victims of abuse, that they think they did something wrong. Think about what these kids went through. Let's go to the fourth count. Again, this is the last count that Ruby Franke pled guilty to. This is actually number 6 in the original information. And this was about abuse of EF that constituted physical injury that includes multiple injuries. Count 4. The defendant's actions caused 2 or more physical injuries to EF. She was forced to work outside in the heat barefoot. She was also forced to run barefoot on dirt roads for an extended period of time. Remember, this was during the summer. EF's feet were repeatedly injured by, and she was repeatedly sunburned. When examined on August 30th, these wounds were apparent by scabs, blisters, and sloughing skin. I don't know if there's even more I have to say here.
I agree. But you know what I mean? How many people are in the neighborhood witnessing this happen? And again, there were ones that called the police and the police didn't do anything. Or they called CPS and CPS didn't fucking do anything. And it's just... It's going to be such an injustice to these kids if Ruby is able to throw all this on to Jody. Ruby, aren't you a part of that company that Jody set up? Connections? Yes, you are. You're equally as responsible. We're aware of what you're doing to evade the responsibility. Babe, we're aware. But what these children have to live with, and by the way, these children are the children that were years prior, months prior, were being plastered all over YouTube with mommy's vlog channel. Like their entire life under the control of both of their parents, Kevin and Ruby, and Jody, who apparently was another fucking parent to them. How do you even begin to process that as an adult? But how do you begin to process that as a 9, 10, 11-year-old who's actively now witnessing your parents go through a legal battle? That's why I don't want Kevin getting custody. Custody was the word I was looking for of these children.
So what we have here is repeated physical abuse and injuries, not isolated incidents. They both suffered. They both suffered tremendously. It is horrifying stuff. Which leads me to an important part of this plea agreement document. So as part of this deal, Ruby Franke agrees to give up her constitutional rights. Her rights to a jury trial, to call witnesses, to testify at her trial, to appeal.
But it's a performative thing. She's doing that so that in the eyes, she's admitting it. That's literally what this is. I spent all of today going through Reddit posts, YouTube comments, getting people's opinions and takes on this because I'm still learning about the legal system and I'm trying to figure things out. But the overall consensus from all these different places I've gotten is that Ruby Franke, in an attempt to cut out a jury, cut out the children having to go to trial, is trying to be seen favorably by the judge, by the public, by whatever, that she's not, trying to drag this on, she's trying to rush the process so that she gets what she deserves. It's an emotional manipulation, or just manipulation, to get people to think, oh, what you did was bad, and we kind of feel bad for you. Which is why it's going to be so interesting as to what Jody does now, because if Jody takes a guilty plea, then it's going to be like, oh, well, what now? But if Jody doesn't, then, it can go to trial. And then the kids will have to testify. And I mean, Jody has connections, refuse the name of the company that she has, in all these different churches and all these different things that will come to the stand to defend Jody. So I believe that Jody won't take a guilty plea, but it is obviously possible. I believe that she won't because she has so many people that could come to defend her, and then it'll be a case of Jody's not pleading guilty, Ruby's pleading guilty, so who is going to be more favorable in the public's eye? Ruby Franke. Then you're going to start putting all the blame onto Jody because she's fighting it, and then you forget about Ruby. This is what these people want to do.
But now let's get into the consequences for entering a plea. Now, there's nothing in here that prosecutors and attorneys worked out regarding a determinate sentence, and in light of this, we agree to 6 months in prison now. Instead, let me read this to you. I know the maximum sentence that may be imposed for each crime to which I am pleading guilty. I know that by pleading guilty to a crime that carries a mandatory penalty, I will be subjecting myself to serving a mandatory penalty for that crime. I know my sentence may include a prison term, fine. I know that in addition to a 90% surcharge will be imposed. I also know that I may be ordered to make restitution to any victims of my crimes, including any restitution that may be owed on charges that are dismissed as part of a plea agreement. I know that if there is more than one crime involved, the sentences may be imposed one after another consecutively, or they may run at the same time concurrently.
Well, that normally is what happens, Ruby, whenever you do multiple things that are very, very, very wrong and you have to deal with the repercussions of each of them back to fucking back. Oh my God, it's this woe me. I'm pleading guilty and I know I shouldn't because I'm gonna face the repercussions. I'm gonna have to deal with it. I'm gonna have to pay. You fucking did it!
So, it is up to the judge to determine what the sentence will be. And theoretically, it could be the maximum of 15 years in prison on each to run consecutively, one after the other. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but in light of what she pled guilty to and what she admitted, my opinion, there is no way she isn't getting prison time in my mind. No way. This is horrific conduct. And as much as
But it's even crazy that people can be like, in my mind, there's no way she's not getting prison time. That there's something to even consider there. She should be, and hopefully she will.
She puts the blame on Jodi. She admitted to directly engaging in this behavior and allowing this to happen to her kids. And for a prolonged period of time, 3 months in the hot summer. In fact, let me add this too. It says in this agreement, quote, the defendant agrees to serve a prison term and the sentences for each count are to be served consecutive to each other. It seems to me that is something we may see. So even if it is 1 year in prison, that's a minimum of 4 years in prison. Theoretically, that's what we could be looking at. She could be looking at more. I'm just reading the tea leaves from this agreement. We will wait to see what happens. But I do want to move on to another big point in this plea agreement. The defendant agrees to testify truthfully against Jodi Hildebrandt. And in return, the Washington County Attorney's Office agrees to remain neutral regarding future hearings before the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole. So, in other words, she will be a state's witness. She will testify against Jodi Hildebrandt. In exchange, the prosecution will not seek to keep her in prison at a later parole hearing. That's what we were expecting to hear. That is a very, very big deal because you would want to give Ruby Franke a plea deal. And I imagine that's maybe why they dropped 2 of these counts. You want her to be the state's star witness against her co-defendant, Jodi Hildebrandt. So you drop 2 charges, maybe secure some sort of lenient sentence. That puts pressure on Jodi, though, to maybe...
Again, this is what I'm saying. It's an easy, it's coming across as she's been advised to take the easy way out of blaming Jodi. And I guess we're going to see her on the stand completely blaming everything on Jodi. I mean, surety is, it's such an easy way out. But at the end of the day, we need to remember that she is literally in a company with Jodi and they were living together and doing this together. They were doing this together. She chose to do these things to her children. You could argue that Jodi persuaded her. Who chose to do them? Ruby. So, fucking womp womp.
You take a deal too. Having Ruby testify against you is not great. And it also seems that you would want Ruby to testify so as maybe to not have the kids be forced to testify about what they endured. You always want to avoid minor witnesses testifying if you can. That is extremely painful for them. And from a credibility point of view, those who suffer abuse at such a young age, it can make it very difficult to remember certain details. So,
and it's so much pressure.
Your star witness makes sense. Now, I will say, could this help Jodi Hildebrandt? Will she want to fight this? Could she say, hey, Ruby just admitted to everything she did. I had no part in this. It's going to be very, very hard to argue that given what we have just read and the evidence in this case so far, but something to think about. Now, there's a part that Ruby can withdraw the plea before the sentence. Her sentencing is set for February 20th. We will make sure to cover that here on Sidebar. But as for Jodi Hildebrandt, she has a waiver hearing scheduled for December 27th. Will she plead guilty? Will that hearing be delayed? Will she merely waive her right to a preliminary hearing? We shall see. The game has changed, though, now that Ruby did this. And by the way, here was the prosecutor, Eric Clark, after the hearing where they held a presser talking about this.
This morning, Ruby Franke pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. She will remain incarcerated awaiting sentencing, which will occur, and the date was February 20th, I believe. We are pleased that Mrs. Franke has accepted responsibility for her criminal actions and that justice is being served to the extent possible in this type of a situation.
Shut up.
We're grateful for the law enforcement officers, caseworkers, Children's Justice Center staff.
Okay, whatever. I'm stopping this here. We're grateful for the law enforcement and all this. Well, not whenever they weren't doing anything for fucking years when apparently the neighbors were calling them. Give me a fucking break. Okay, this is going to be interesting to see what happens on the 27th. Will Jodi show up? Will Jody say, well, Ruby agreed to everything and it was actually her that did everything? That's a possible way out for Jody. Well, obviously it won't be a way out, but will Jody say, I'm also guilty and try to like work together to get like a lesser sentence? Will Jody say, I'm not guilty and it will have to go to a trial? What do you think is going to happen? Either way, it's just gotten so much more messy. Ruby is obviously taking the approach of trying to look like the more innocent one in this, but Jody could completely combat that. Who knows? Let's talk about it down below. This video from Law and Crime Network will be linked down below. Love their channel. I will see you all very soon. I hope you're all doing very well, and goodbye.